This is a great movie. So yesterday I watched this movie, Man from Earth, twice. Awesome movie. Some of the acting was subpar. It is all conversation. There's no action except at the very, very end that has a great surprise ending. But the movie, and I'm going to try not to spoil it too much for you, but I got to tell you a little bit and you'll understand why I'm talking about the movie in itself. The movie basically is about a college professor who is leaving after being with his contemporaries for 10 years. And they don't understand why he's leaving. And then he decides that he's going to tell them who he really is. And he is basically a Cro-Magnon man that for some reason has been able to stay alive up until today. 14,000 years he has lived. That means he was living at the end of the last ice age and has continued to live till today. Now, there are many interesting perspectives from the movie that are intriguing to me. Immortality. If a person was immortal, what would it really look like? Not the immortal genius, but a man who is only as intelligent as the time frame to which he is in, and that not meaning he's the most intelligent. But there were two interesting aspects of this movie that relates to deconstructionists. And that's the part that I'm going to talk about, how it relates to Christian deconstructionists. So in one part of the movie that sent me down a rabbit hole for 4 hours last night, literally for 4 hours, I went down a rabbit hole where he mentioned that the story of Moses is really based on Moses of Syria, that Moses was pulled from the waters, that Moses pulled from the waters from a boat, that Moses freed the people, that Moses gave laws written on tablets, that Moses staff turned into a snake, that the Moses story was based on a Syrian story. Now, for 4 hours, I went down a rabbit hole trying to find information about Moses. The only information that I really found was on Reddit, Quora, and then one article that was written by a gentleman who is writing for the University of Missouri. And I don't know the credibility of that gentleman. Some people question his credibility, but there was no peer review. I couldn't find any archaeological evidence of this Mises story. There's only one person in education who's talking about it. Everything else, there's nothing. I went into parts of the internet that most people don't venture into to find information about him. There is nothing about Mises. So I cannot with good consciousness say that the Moses story has anything to do with Mises, which is why in the previous video where I talked about Osiris and Tacitus and Diodorus and other people talking about Moses from other stories, there's just nothing. But I learned a lot of other things just going through that 4 hours of studying, looking for one thing. I learned a bunch of other things. But anyway, but the part that was most intriguing to me, and it reminded me of many other different stories and things that people talk about. He says, and I hate to spoil this part for those of you who are deconstructionists, but when they asked him, did he know anyone of biblical note? He said that he did, in sort of way. And that everything that has these other overlays, religious overlays, which distorts the story. And basically it went like this. Previously he had talked about how he had journeyed to the east, and at the time frame he so happened to meet Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. And he sat and learned under the Buddha until the Buddha died. After the Buddha died, he returned back to the west, to the Mediterranean. He then became an Etruscan and thought that he can help the Roman Empire, but saw that the Roman Empire was just a killing machine. So then he thought, let me go back to the Mesopotamia, to the Levant, and teach the Buddhist teachings, but in a more modern, updated version. And modern meaning first century, 500 years later. And he begins to teach the teachings of Buddhism to the people of the Levant, and he gains a following. There is no massive sermon on the mount. He taught on a hill one day. He taught about love. He taught about brotherhood. He taught about the relinquishing of the I. He taught those things. And when he was found to be in sedition of the Roman government, he was not nailed to a cross, but tied to a cross. But because he had learned deep meditations to the point where you can slow the human body down to the point where you appear to be dead, which is not just something that you'll find in Buddhist meditations, but you can also find this in Shinto as well, of being able to control the heartbeat, to slow it down, the breathing, everything to appear to be dead. After they took him off the cross and he was in the grave, he tried to leave, but some of his devotees were standing watch. When they saw him, they thought that he was resurrected. And he then escaped to Central Europe to get away from it all. And then over the centuries, he watched churches and rulers take the message and the story and put all these overlays on it to make it into the nail to the cross, the miracles, and all these other sorts of things, that there were no true disciples, that Peter wasn't a disciple. Peter just learned to be a better man as a fisherman, things of that nature. It reminded me of how there is archaeological evidence as well as written evidence that the people of, and logical evidence, that the people of the Levant would have encountered Buddhist priests. There was a group of people in Judea called the Suramana. And the Suramana were Buddhists who were leaving and escaping the persecution by the Brahmins in order to teach Buddhism. And that it is possible that Jesus, the historical Jesus, who are characters who are described and could create the biblical version of Jesus, that they would have had the opportunity. Doesn't mean that they did, but they could have had the opportunity to encounter the Buddhist teachings prior to teaching the message that has now been distorted into what Christianity has become. Because there are many similarities between some of the Buddhist teachings and some of the teachings that you do have within your Bible. The teachings of brotherly love, the teaching of not holding on to personal possessions, not identifying your self-worth on personal possession, the impermanence of life. That those are some teachings that are similar to the Buddhist teaching, that you work to ascend to the heavens, that is it not written that ye are gods. Divinity is just goodness. There is nothing more, nothing less than that. Divinity is purely just goodness. So those were some of the teachings, and it reminded me of some of those things. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about that. And it also reminded me that a follower of this page, follower of my Facebook page, sent me a DM, and I'm sorry for everybody else, I get like 100 DMs a day. But he asked, what do I think about Buddhism? Because he's a Buddhist, he's never been Christian, but he's curious as to my thoughts of Buddhism. And I think that Buddhism, in its purity, because it has had denominational effects the same way as Christianity, the message has been skewed the same way as Christianity. But for a philosophy of life, Buddhism is, if I had to choose a religious practice to follow out of the ones that are the bigger ones today, I would choose Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Middle Passageway are more connected to alchemy and hermetics than any other type of philosophy. That to end suffering is to stop identifying with the self, to have a right mind, to have right motivations, right actions, right perspective. That the impermanence of life and everything is always changing, and there is no such thing as change. That the soul, the soul is something that you always have and never lose, and does not need to be saved by anyone. I prefer the Buddhist philosophy over most others. The Tao philosophy, even more so, it will be right there neck and neck with it. So I think it's a great movie for you guys to check out. I watched it twice yesterday. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.